Shalom, everyone, and thanks for joining Pearls of Joy, Tru-Truth. Today, I am going to be talking about suffering for righteousness' sake. And in this part of the seed of righteousness, I did a video a couple of weeks ago, and it was called Who Are the Righteous? And I did another one that breaks down and explains the differences in the fruit of the Spirit, the fruit of righteousness, and the work of the flesh. Today I'm going to be dealing with suffering for righteousness' sake. Suffering means to bear, as one enduring a burden, or as a woman bearing a child in her womb until she is delivered, or a tree bearing fruit until it is plucked or until the fruit falls. Suffering is also to endure pain, discomfort, or uneasiness until joy comes. As children of the Most High Yah, we should be working out our salvation for righteousness' sake. And as we work out our salvation, we become the righteousness of Yahuah through our Mashiach. And I am going to read 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 8 through 17. And in 1 Peter chapter 3, starting at verse 7, it says, verse 8. Finally, be ye all of one mind, having compassion one of another. Love as brethren. Be pitiful, be courteous, not rendering evil for evil, or railing for railing, but contrariwise blessing, knowing that you are therefore unto called, that you should inherit a blessing. There's a blessing in us walking in true ahab towards one another as the body of Mashiach. Verse 10 says, for he that will love life and see good days, let him refrain his tongue from evil, and his lips that they speak no guile. Let him eschew evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of Yahuah are over the righteous, and his ears are open unto their prayers. But the face of Yahuah is against them that do evil. And who is he that will harm you, if you be followers of that which is good? And if you suffer for righteousness' sake, happy are you. And be not afraid of their terror, neither be troubled. And that's talking about the troubles that we endure in this time of working out our salvation, that is going to prepare us for that time when we are going to have to stand when our enemies are coming at us, and we are going to have to be able to stand according to the fruits of righteousness. And I'll get into that a little bit more a little bit later in this video. And verse 15 says, but sanctify Yahuah in your hearts, and be ready always to give an answer to every man that asks you a reason of the hope that is in you, with meekness and fear, having a good conscience, that whereas they speak evil of you as evildoers, they may be ashamed that falsely accuse your good conversation in Mashiach. For it is better, if the will of Yahuah be so, that you suffer for well-doing than for evil-doing. For Mashiach also have once suffered for sins, the just for the unjust, that he might bring us to Yahuah, being put to death in the flesh, but quickened by the Spirit. And that's a good example of how our Mashiach suffered for us to bring us back to the Most High. And we working out our salvation to become like him, as we were originally created in his likeness. When we operate in true Yahuah, one towards another, then we are being prepared to receive eternal salvation. The entire chapter 3 of 1 Peter is about how we should be as a unit and towards one another, because this is where we need to be in order to inherit the kingdom of Yahuah, to be a part of the kingdom of Yahuah. We have to be on one accord. We have to be operating, saying the same thing, doing the same thing, and walking in Yahuah, as far as being respectful towards one another, lifting each other up, and, you know, being true brothers and sisters in Mashiach. Through our sufferings, we learn obedience, as did our Mashiach. We are, right now, where we are in a place where we are practicing the script while we are still in this captivity. We shall be saved out of this captivity in righteousness, after we have learned to walk in righteousness. You see, when we first receive salvation, the next step is to work out our salvation according to the fruits of the Spirit spoken about in Galatians chapter 5, verses 18 through 26. And I'm going to turn over there and read a few verses from there to prove this point, or to show what the fruits of the Spirit is, and how we are supposed to walk in these one towards another. So in Galatians chapter 5, let me get there. Just give me a moment. Okay. Galatians, and I mentioned this in the last video I did, that is called the fruits of the Spirit, the differences in the fruit of the Spirit, the fruit of righteousness, and the works of the flesh. Okay, in verse 5, chapter 5, verse 18, it says, "But if you be led of the Spirit, you are not under the law." And let me just stop a moment and explain this, because this is one of the verses that is used to say that we're not under the law. And most people are talking about the whole law. In this particular context, this is not talking about the entire law. This is talking about the law of the Spirit of righteousness, because in the other video I mentioned that the Spirit of righteousness is a law that was brought to us through Yahushua. And that's what law this particular verse is talking about. It's talking about the Spirit of righteousness. And if we are walking or led by the Spirit of righteousness, we are not under the law. And this is talking about the law of sin and death. And I'm going to do another video talking about the law and breaking it down to give understanding the differences in the fact that there are different laws. Verse 19, now the works of the flesh. And this verse 19 breaks down and explains what the works of the flesh. And these are the things that we do to each other that causes us to destroy each other. And these things should not be. And it says, the works of the flesh are manifest, which are these: adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, variance, emulations, wrath, strife, seditions, heresies, envying, murders, drunkenness, ravelings, and such like, of which I tell you before, as I have also told you in times past, that they which do such things shall not inherit the kingdom of Yahuah. See, some people think that, oh, I'm saved and I believe, and when he returned, I'm going to be present with him. If we have any of these things operating in us that's against the fruit of the Spirit, we will not inherit the kingdom of Yahuah. Now, verse 22 tells us what the fruit of the Spirit is. And these are the things that we should be operating in towards one another. Verse 22 says, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, Yahuah, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance, against which there is no law. And they that are Mashiachs have crucified the flesh with the affections and lusts. So when we are operating according to the fruit of the Spirit, and we're not fulfilling the works of the flesh, then we are fulfilling the fruit of the Spirit, which would cause us to put off the lusts and the evil things that we may do or think, as a matter of fact. Then are we operating according to the fruit of the Spirit, which makes us right. And we all have trials in our lives that will cause us to have to work these fruits. Because when these little trials come up against you, whether it be through someone, something, there's a saying that it's not always what happened to you, is how you deal with it. Yeah, so as I said, once we receive salvation, the next step is to work out our salvation according to the fruits of the Spirit that we just talked about, with fear and trembling. And in this context, fear and trembling, and that would be Philippians 2:12. Fear means to reverence or respect, and also pay attention, focus, and work it out to full fruition with humility. And this causes us to bear the fruit of righteousness. And yes, in so many cases, we have to be humble, because this flesh wants to get off and do its own thing. Suffering, which is bearing, causes us to bear fruit. We bear the fruit of righteousness if we don't faint. We must develop endurance. In order to bear fruit, we have to develop endurance. In Yahuah, all things are related to agricultural. And if you've listened to any of my videos, you will hear me talking about relating things to agriculture. You might think that I know something about agriculture. I only know by the Spirit. Agricultural is our example of Him and His ways. Agriculture gives us understanding in the natural of how, what, and when to plant, and how to take care of it to produce the best fruit. Spiritually, the fruit of righteousness teaches us to plant seeds of righteousness, and this teaches us how to love. This teaches us joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, and faith, self-control, and meekness. Also, verse 21 also says that without the fruit of righteousness, they shall not inherit the kingdom of Elohim. A tree of righteousness starts out as a seed, and this is in the natural, that grows into a tree with branches that have vines. The vines of a tree contain oil, and the fruit is produced out of the vine. The oil of the vine is like the Spirit, the oil of joy. This oil gives the tree its strength because it is being nourished through the vine. The Spirit of righteousness is a tree that produces good fruit. Salvation started with a tree in the beginning, in the garden. It's the tree of life, and that tree represents life. The Garden of Eden is the focus of our salvation. Our complete salvation is finished with the tree in Revelation. So it starts out with a tree. The focus of what Yahushua came to do, to redeem us back, is with a tree. And at the end, we will be brought back to that tree of life. Because Yahushua said that I am the vine, you are the branches. The root comes from the seed, the planting of Yahuah, our Elohim. When we are bearing the fruit of righteousness, it produces endurance in us to stand to the end. We must be filled with the fruit of the Spirit of righteousness, that we may be like the trees of righteousness, planted by the rivers of water, which is nourished, healthy, and able to stand when the storms come. This includes the storms of life circumstances and situations, and the storms of tribulation that are upon us by our enemies. There, as I said before, there's a saying that says, it's not what happens to you, it's how you deal with it. The trials we endure on a day-to-day basis are pressing us to bear and develop fruit. We have to learn to suffer evil, even when we are right, just as it said in First Peter chapter 3. We have to endure pain many times and wrong, even if we are right. I'll give you an example. Sometimes we have to endure this wrong and not go off and cuss people out, especially our own sisters and brothers. In these instances, we are required to be temperate. We have to have self-control and be patient and long-suffering. And this is what Yahuah has had to do with us. And this is how we are to be according to the way that he has been long-suffering with us. We have to be long-suffering with other people. And this is how we are being created in his likeness. We are working out our salvation where it's not easy. And I'm not saying roll out like a doormat and be walked on. We must have wisdom and discernment to choose our battles. Most of our fights are not our battle. It's Yahuah's. Our fight is the fight of faith, to trust him. Many times we have to back up off the situation and trust him and let him fight the battle. While we are enduring the heat of the fight and the remembering to operate according to the fruit of righteousness. So while we're going through this thing, we got to back up and we got to be reminded how we are to operate and how we are to allow the fruits of the Spirit to be in manifestation. I'll give you another example of how many times you suffer for righteousness' sake. There was a time when I had a commercial building and I was selling the building to another lady. And because this lady, I found out later, did not understand how business operates, especially when it comes to selling, buying and selling. And just like, a lot of other businesses, you have, many times people have a mortgage on the building. I had a mortgage on this commercial building, which there was more money due on the mortgage. And when we came to the table and did the contract, the next thing I know, this lady is accusing me and my husband at the time, accusing us of trying to run a game on her, trick her into a mortgage that have liens on it. I realized that she didn't understand that when you sell a property, when you go to closing, whatever liens is on the building, whether it be a mortgage or whatever, before everything is paid, all of those liens have to be paid. And evidently she did not understand that. So I went to her. I had allowed her to move into the building and everything before we closed on the property. And I went to her to talk to her to try to iron out all of this misunderstanding. And she rose up against me and told me to get off of her property. I mean, and this was supposed to, well, she was a Christian. That's kind of understandable. Yeah, she told me to get off her property, wherein we had not even closed on the property. And of course, my flesh wanted to rise up and retaliate, but I had to back up and calm it down and collect myself and walk away. Yet, the works of the flesh wanted to throw a bomb in there and blow up everything. But you see, then I would have been operating according to the flesh. And later on, maybe a year later, I was fellowshipping and serving at another congregation. There was a couple that came to the congregation, and they had been a part of this lady's ministry because she was holding a Bible study in the building that she was supposed to be buying. And after this couple had been in the congregation where I was fellowshipping and serving at, I didn't really know them, but I would say maybe a few months afterwards, the young lady came to me and said to me that, I owe you an apology. And I'm thinking, an apology for what? I don't really know you. What did you do to me that you think you owe me an apology? She went on to say that she used to be a part of that congregation with that lady that was hosting that Bible study. And she said that she would have the whole congregation to stand in a circle, and they were praying prayers against me and my husband at the time. And I knew that there was something going on in the spirit, because every morning I would wake up and my confession would be, I put on the whole armor of Yah, that I am able to stand against the wiles of the enemy. And throughout this process, I would wake up in the morning and I literally felt like I had on armor. It was like I can literally feel metal clinking when I rose in the morning, because I was clothed in the armor, because righteousness is a part of your armor. Okay. So I'm gonna go right back to where I left off at. A tree that is rooted and grounded in righteousness can stand through the storms, because when the winds come and blow, that oil of joy, which is like the Ruach, the set apart spirit, it causes that tree to be flexible and bear like a strong tower. Wherefore, when the winds of the storm come, that tree may bend, but it will not break. As I mentioned before, I would suggest that you would go back and look at those two videos, which are called The Righteous and it explains what the works of the flesh is and the works of the spirit, and the works of the law and the works of righteousness. I will leave a link for those videos. I also explained the fact that the righteous seed of Abraham, and how that seed came through Jacob from Isaac to Jacob, and then it trickled down to our Mashiach, the King of righteousness. Bearing the fruit of righteousness is suffering for righteousness' sake, meaning that as we bear this fruit, it's going to produce something. It's just like when you purge a plant and you pluck it, and it's going to sprout out and it's going to bear more fruit. He who does not bear the fruit of righteousness shall be cut off and burned. Abba is the gardener, and Yahushua is the vine of the trees of righteousness. We are the branches that must be purged to bear fruit, to bring forth more fruit. If we do not bear fruit, we are taken away like dead branches and burned. Just like the one good example is the example of the fig tree. It wasn't bearing anything, so he plucked it off. And John 15, 1 through 5 talks about the tree that does not bear, it will be burned. And I will close with this. Now that we are awakened and understand who we are and the commission to take this Torah to the world, we are working out our salvation with fear and trembling to receive eternal salvation. Then we can proclaim that we are the righteousness of Yahuah in Yahushua. We must put on the whole armor of Yahuah that we are able to stand against the wiles of the enemy. The fruits of the Spirit is a part of our armor. It is the breastplate of righteousness that protects us. Well, I hope something was imparted to help us to focus on developing and allowing the fruits of the Spirit to be developed in us. And I'll say this one more thing. I know for me, when I have asked Father to cause the fruits of the Spirit to be developed in me, I was in for a rude awakening, because all kind of trials came out at me that made me have to develop those fruits. Otherwise, I would have to continue to go through those trials over and over again until I get it. Thank you for clicking in. Shabbat Shalom.